As you can see, we've had our eye on you for some time now, Mr. Anderson.
Really don't mind if you sit this one out. My words but a whisper, your deafness a shout. I may make you feel, but I can't make you think. Your sperm's in the gutter, your love's in the sink. So you ride yourselves over the fields, and you make all your animal deals, and your wise men don't know how it feels to be thick as a brick.
Hello, and welcome to a conversation with Mr. Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. I'm your host, Eric Miller. This is part of the Pods and Sods network, and I want to thank you first off for, clicking the download button or the subscribe button or whatever combination of buttons you clicked in order to get this episode, and for checking it out. Very much appreciated. It was a real honor to speak to Ian. It was originally scheduled for 15 minutes, but we kind of got into it a little bit. He likes to talk, which is certainly a very cool thing. He's got a lot to say and says it well. He's always an interesting interview to listen to, and it was my pleasure to speak with him. I did have a bit of audio issues, but I sort of had to go a backup route in order to record this. But I think it sounds fair, but maybe slightly below average in terms of things I'm presenting, but hopefully it won't be a deterrent. I don't think it is, but just keep that in mind. What we do talk about a lot is, sort of the art of Jethro Tull, and he's actually putting out a tour. He's going on tour with a rock opera version of Jethro Tull, kind of based on Jethro Tull, the agriculturalist's life. So very interesting and certainly timely, and we get into that as well. Among other things, he gets into some sort of funny Spinal Tap-ish road stories towards the end of the episode. So hopefully you'll stick around for that, and hope you enjoy it. So without any further ado, my conversation with Mr. Ian Anderson. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Ian Anderson. Welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. Nice to talk to you.
Thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. I was reading up on some of your influences, and a couple that you often cite are sort of varied, Beethoven and Muddy Waters, which I thought was interesting, and it made me sort of wonder about, how you sort of see your work along that scale, if you will, because they're kind of polar opposites in terms of theory versus feel. So how do you sort of see yourself, along that scale, or your work?
Well, those two composers, performers, which they both were, if you like, they epitomize the heart and the head approach to music. However, structurally, in terms of organization, detail, and delivery, Muddy Waters, gets the job done, from a basic technical standpoint, and Beethoven, whilst being a master of cerebral, organized, detailed music, it also has an enormous heart that is evident, particularly in his symphonies with grand statements. Right. So, whilst they may, for me, epitomize those opposites in a way, I think they both serve as an example, is that you have to find a combination that works. You have to find a balance, and that's why they probably appeal to me, because they do reinforce in my mind the need in my music to find a balance between emotion and the more intellectual. Right. So, you're trying to find ways musically and indeed lyrically to work within generally a balance. It would be true to say some of my earlier songs were probably a bit short on technical organization, both lyrically and musically, but once we got into the third, fourth album, probably from Aqualung onwards, it was getting a bit more of a thought through balance between emotion and intellect.
Right. What is it about? So you've written hundreds and hundreds of songs. What is it about certain ones that you think have hit?
Well, I've written 100 and half another 100 songs. So about 250 songs, maybe coming up towards 300.
Okay.
If you sort of scrape the barrel in the repertoire, that's the big job. And I think what I do, looking back on it, is to try and make sense of it in terms of subject matter. Perhaps I divide it into areas. I divide it into areas in terms of musical style. Probably these days I think more about the lyrics than I do the music, because the music is, for me, fairly easy to play. There's nothing difficult in relearning a piece of music and just getting it up to a performance standard, from a musical point of view. From a performance and a vocal point of view, you're singing words, and those words you've got to re-engage with, sometimes words that were written 40 years ago or more.
Right.
And that isn't always quite as easy, because you have to put your head in a different place to the place that it normally is today, that of a almost 68-year-old man. So
Right.
I have to do a little bit of time warping, take on a little bit of a character role if I'm going to go back and sing something from 1969,
Right.
which is indeed what I will be doing in about half an hour from now, because I have to go and prepare a little bit in advance for rehearsals that start with the band in 2 weeks' time.
Excellent.
So it is about re-engaging with your earlier self,
Right.
and earlier topics that might not necessarily be the topics you would write about today, and almost certainly not in the way that you would write them today.
Understood. Right.
40 odd years later, there would be perhaps a little more depth or detail in the lyrics, I
Right.
suppose, the way that I would write them now.
you mentioned you're going off to rehearsal. So what I wanted to talk to you about is you're going off to do sort of a rock opera presentation of Jethro Tull. And it's based on, the agriculturalist Jethro Tull, and set sort of in the slightly near future. Presumably you did some research on his life. Any surprises or discoveries made?
Well, it was mostly discovery, yes, because having been named by our agent back in February of 1968, we were in blissful ignorance, I think, for a couple of weeks at least, that he'd named us after a dead guy who invented a seed drill, because none of us really had covered that bit of history at school. At least I know I hadn't. So it was with some embarrassment and then guilt that I have worn that title all these years. It's a tricky one, It's caused me some mild anguish because of the unoriginality of it, the fact that I'm slightly embarrassed that I didn't know who Jethro Tull was when our agent suggested the name, and I think these days I do try to separate, in my own mind at any rate, the idea that Jethro Tull, the band, is Jethro Tull, the repertoire, in the same way as we would talk about, when we talk about Mozart or Bach or Beethoven, we're really referring almost always to the repertoire. We don't know the people. They're not. They don't have websites. They're not on. They're not on YouTube. They're not accessible through Facebook. These are people who are historical, long gone, and we tend to refer to them really not as personalities, but more their repertoire. Right. And I think perhaps that's the way we look upon the legacy artists, whether they are of the 1800s, the 1900s, the 20th century, or the 21st century. We're really always talking, I think, more often about repertoire. If we refer to the Beatles, we're not really referring to John, Paul, George and Ringo. We're referring to this enormous repertoire of incredibly good, invented pop music. Right. Most of it written really in just over a scanty few years in the mid to late 60s. Right. And that's quite an interesting reality that I think people forget about. They are somehow caught up with individuals and personalities, especially through modern media. Think perhaps too much about what Elton John is, whether he's the biological father of his children or whether it's the other guy. I mean, we get caught up in all these sort of things rather than remembering the man's music. Right. So a bit of a danger there. But I was traveling through Italy. I think it was Italy, maybe southern Germany, but somewhere in northern Europe, or Western Europe anyway, in the summer of last year, going through farmland, and I just was looking out of the car window, just taking in what was being grown, how it was being grown, methods of cropping, and I had access to the internet, and decided to check out the original Jethro Tull, see what he was about. And there's not an enormous amount of material written about Jethro Tull, but such as there is, immediately conjured up notions of certain songs I'd written. And to amuse myself on the journey, I wrote down a list of all the songs that seemed applicable to elements in his life. Right. And then, of course, the logical thought occurred, well, maybe I could perform these songs as a kind of an homage to Jethro Tull, the historical character, and make him the narrative, really, the narrative context for a best of Jethro Tull set list. then the problem came, of course, that this would be a historical, period drama, sort of the Three Musketeers with a flute.
Right.
Or a flute each, God help us. And that didn't really, for me, ring the right kind of bells. I thought I can't bring myself to be wearing silly hats and tights and wigs and costume of that sort. It's got to, it just doesn't feel right. So I'll put our Jethro Tull into the present day or slightly near future and reimagine his work as being a biochemist working on patented technologies to improve agriculture through genetic modification of crops and cloning, and using all the technology there that we will have to bring to bear to feed an ever-growing and ever-hungry planet. It's something that it's not a matter of choice,
Right.
It's a matter of absolute necessity that we really, really do pursue with great haste the improved methodologies to feed so many people. And we have to do that pretty quickly, even if sometimes it scares the pants off folks who don't like the idea of meddling with nature. But in a way, just by most of the things that science has already established or is working on are already mimicked or part of the natural occurrence anyway.
Right.
I mean, it's a very, very small step from GMO to traditional selective breeding of animals and plants. It's something that we have interfered with, if you call it that, for centuries, almost for millennia, since the very beginning of man putting down roots, literally, and staying in one place and deciding to become farmers rather than nomadic hunter-gatherers.
Right.
So, this is not really rocket science in a bad way. It's rocket science in the only way that we have to sustain the populations of the future.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what I'm bringing into the context of the so-called rock opera.
Yeah, and I think that's a highly important message, because we're probably already beyond the tipping point. So, thank you for sort of enlightening people on that. The argument of, agribusiness for profit versus, altruistic intentions to feed populations, that doesn't get discussed terribly often. How do you see that evolving, or maybe your rendering of Tull?
There are times, when I found it difficult as an aquaculturalist that I was involved in something that was increasingly becoming a big business. I mean, not agro-business on the scale of, Monsanto or whatever,
Right,
but
right.
Nonetheless industrial as a form of new farming methodologies, and that really led me to hang up my life preserver and my survival suit in the around the 2001, 2002. I thought I just don't really want to carry on with this, because it is becoming too much of a big industry. And after only 20 years since I began farming salmon, it seemed time to wind it down and let other people wrestle with the ethical dilemma, if indeed they do, as to whether or not the scale of aquaculture has become injurious globally to many other prey fish species of salmon and other fish. So
Right.
I think the environmental, the ecological significance is that aquaculture generally needs to stay relatively small, otherwise it has enormous impact. Basically, not so much from environmental damage through waste and pollution, but the damage to the food chains through the industrial hoovering up of vast amounts of prey species, which are turned into high density, high efficient fish meal to feed
Right.
supposedly luxury fish like salmon and sea bass and others, which I think basically we would probably consume rather too much of.
And you have, so having said all that, so, going back to your catalog and some of the songs fitting into this opera, there are some sort of obvious ones that, seem like perfect fits in terms of man's relationship with, our green-blue ball that we're on, like Skating Away or Songs from the Wood. How was it overlaying your material to this narrative?
Well, I think, there's a danger that if what you're talking about is sometimes verging on the doom and gloom scenarios, you are going to come across perhaps as preaching or
right,
basically boring the pants off people. So you've got to keep it a little upbeat and a little lighter. And of course, like any other story of a person's life, even though in the case of Jethro Tull, the agriculturalist, we don't know too much about his personal life. We know only very little about his parents, about his wife. So, I have to, like any dramatist, I have to use my artistic license to try and create a little bit of something out of it, and but without venturing too far into fabrications that would be disrespectful to the historical character. So, I've taken some elements of his life and a couple of the people around him to feature in this show, which means I have those characters as virtual guests.
Right.
Essentially, there are three main virtual guests who appear playing character parts, both theatrically and singing and talking, and so and they're all people I've worked with before, so it's like having old friends with me on stage, but
nice.
I don't have to pay their hotel bill every night.
Meanwhile, back in the year one, when you belonged to no one, you didn't stand a chance, son, if your pants were undone. 'Cause you were bred for humanity and sold to society. One day you'll wake up in the present day, a million generations removed from expectations of being who you really want to be. Skating away, skating away, skating away on the thin ice of a new day. So as you push off from the shore, won't you turn your head once more and make your peace with everyone? But those who choose to stay will live just one more day to do the things they should have done. And as you cross the wilderness, spending in your emptiness, you feel you have to pray, looking for a sign that the universal mind has written you into the passion play. Skating away, skating away, skating away on the thin ice of a new day. And as you cross the circle line, well, the ice wall creeps behind. You're a rabbit on the run, and the silver splendors fly in the corner of your eye, shining in the setting sun. Well, do you ever get the feeling that the story's too damn real and in the present tense? All that everybody's on the stage, and it seems like you're the only person sitting in the audience. Skating away, skating away, skating away on the thin ice of a new day. Skating away, skating away.
So you've also added some new songs.
Yes, there are 5 short songs that had to be squeezed in there to tell the tale in some of the more specific detail regarding the present day or near future scenarios. So I felt I would have to write a little bit of something, but they are relatively short pieces. And 85% of the running of the whole show is stuff that normally would feature as best of Jethro Tull.
Right.
So it is really just at the end of it all, it's the best of Jethro Tull show, but with the songs set in a context which you can either try to fathom or not. You can be cheerfully entertained by me, the band, and the virtual guests on the video, or just close your eyes and listen to the music.
That's great.
I try and keep those options open because, of course, I don't play only to English-speaking audiences. I'm all over the place, and around about, I should think, during the next 18 months, I should think 40% of the shows that I do will be to people who really don't understand the English language and probably will be scratching their heads a bit, but maybe they get the gist of it.
Right.
And if
hopefully.
they don't, there's lots of pretty colours and nice noises to cling to.
All right. So you mentioned your 68, I believe you said. I read an article recently about Brian May and Roger Taylor talking about sort of the physical tolls of touring, as you get older. And in your case, you're running around singing flute. Is there no way to slow down, to quote you?
Well, I think that all people in different ways of performing, have different tasks,
right?
Different thresholds that they have to try to exceed if they're going to deliver the goods in their own mind and probably the minds of the audience too. So,
right.
If you're Mick Jagger, it's going to be demanding. You're going to have to do a lot of physical prep. You're going to have to be in good shape and skinny and lean and have the endurance to get on stage for a couple of hours. So we do have to remember that is not necessarily easy.
Oh, yeah, of course not.
It may not be technically difficult for Mick Jagger to do his performance in the sense of difficult to sing songs because it is a bit of a shouted out kind of vocal style. Wisely, he chose not to attempt too much of the finer points of melody. So he kind of throws it out there, which means he can run around the stage and get a bit out of puff without it being too detrimental to the music.
Right.
There are other people, obviously, who really struggle with their performance in older age, and not just rock musicians, but of course classical musicians too. Pavarotti, in his final years, was in very bad shape, and in the last year or two of his singing life, which unfortunately came to an end in reality very soon after. He was really finding it difficult. His peak years in his 40s, I suppose, are the bits that we remember through the emergence of the three tenors and the huge, enormous encouragement and world attention that it gave a very broad public to traditional classical opera. I mean, it was an amazing effect, but you had three stars of opera at the peak of their powers,
right,
doing something that I suppose will always be remembered, and luckily was part of the YouTube generation. So, we can see Pavarotti in a number of performances just with a few clicks of the button, and that's something remarkable that we do have that. But towards the end, it was difficult. I mean, I was with Pavarotti on not one-to-one. I never met the guy, but we were on the same show together with actually a Christmas concert in Germany, a big celebration, sort of 2-hour special that was Jose Carreras did as a charity event every year at some point, and this was released, being recorded. Actually, no, I believe it was live on German television. Huge viewing audience, and 25 million people or whatever watched it. And Pavarotti and Jose Carreras were struggling, with their performance in the dress rehearsal. Pavarotti more so, and I was really terrified for both of them that they were going to get a lot of egg on face when it came to the show, because they seemed to be very unprepared, and they were singing a couple of traditional English church pieces, which in the English language, and they both speak English or spoke English pretty well, but it wasn't comfortable for them singing it, without a cue sheet,
right.
and technically it was proving, really quite a very simple music, but it wasn't their comfort zone, and they weren't, it looked really, really scary. They were going to have to do this live in 3 hours' time, and of course it came to showtime, and they both raised their game. I mean, even Pavarotti, who at that point could not walk at all, had to be deposited on the stage using a forklift truck.
Wow.
And exit the stage the same way, and then put in a wheelchair and miraculously whizzed out the back of the building. I mean, he was really on,
wow.
not even on his last legs. He was on no legs at all. He couldn't
Right.
stand up.
Wow.
He was so infirm and so,
Well, that's
I guess, tortured through knowing that his glory years were behind him. But
right.
he just wanted to do it one more time, and that was the not quite the last time he performed, but nearly. So I mean, this happens to people, and there are other folks who keep their wits about them, and the tolls and trials and tribulations of live performance are probably rather overstated. I mean, Robert Plant is absolutely the. I mean, you'd have to say he's a better singer now than he ever was in the Led Zeppelin days, although his voice, like most people's, has probably dropped a couple of semitones to the point where it's more of a less of a high tenor and more of a sort of middle
Right.
tenor. But his vocal ability is probably greater in terms of melody and singing and mastering more emotion out of his voice.
Right.
Some people do pretty well, and others struggle. And I think there's lots of people who have been through difficult times, both as musicians finding it difficult to play their guitar because they've now got arthritis, or they're finding it difficult to travel because they have diseases or problems that make being away from home a bit risky. And
Right.
it's that these things will happen as you get older, but I think for most of us who are still doing it, we don't stop and worry about it or think about it. We just get on with the job. And
Right. Yeah. No, I was.
thank our lucky stars that we are amongst the the fitter and more able for our age. But at the same time, I think we all recognise that
Right.
the odd aches and pains and injuries are cumulative, just as they are if you're a tennis player or a football player. Same thing for folks like me. I have some wrist injury, I have some knee injury, I occasionally have some back injury. These are all things that are a result of running around stages and jumping about.
Right.
They're not things that happened to me when I was windsurfing or bungee jumping. These are stage injuries.
Right. Yeah, I didn't mean to go down sort of a sort of depressing road. I was just sort of asking about endurance. In your case, it's quite literally your wind, right?
Yeah,
Because,
I think it's not necessarily depressing. I think actually what it is really quite uplifting, because you do feel, when you step out onto a stage, you know your limitations, but you actually feel pretty good about the fact that you're there, and that you can do, quite a bit of what you've done since you were in your 20s. But there are certain things you're not going to try to do because of, as I say, you've accumulated a number of injuries or weak points, so you've got to be pretty careful.
Right.
But that's not to feel bad about it. Feel good about it, because you're still here.
And the audience is still there, right? Even.
Well, I mean, some of the audience are in much worse shape than I am. Another reason to feel good about it.
There you go.
shuffling madness of the locomotive breath runs the all-time loser headlong to his death. Oh, it feels the piston scraping, steam breaking on his brow. Old Charlie stole the handle, and the train it won't stop going. No, it could slow down. Oh, he sees his children jumping off the stations one by one. His woman and his best friend in bed and having fun. Oh, he's crawling down the corridor on his hands and knees. Old Charlie stole the handle, and the train it won't stop going. No, it could slow down. The silence howling catches angels as they fall, and the all-time winner has got him by the balls. Oh, he picks up Gideon's Bible, open at page 1. I thank God he stole the handle, and the train it won't stop. Oh, no, it could slow down.
Any plans to film or record any of these dates for release?
Well, it's there are no plans as such, no firm intention to do something on a certain date, but there's I would think a reasonable likelihood,
right,
75% chance that sometime during the course of 2016 we will record video and audio for 2 or 3 shows and cull the best bits to do a live DVD,
right? And
delivery by whatever means. But of course, music DVDs. We've got to put this into context that it's just clinging on by a thread. You know, it's an endangered species, even more so than vinyl records, which have made something of a comeback. Music DVDs started off slowly, but because they were one of the few forms of video programming that you could actually get for your shiny new DVD player, they took off in quite a major way, particularly with some classic bands like the Eagles, who actually, I believe, sold 500,000 copies of a DVD, which was an extraordinary number. And for lesser acts like us, to do 100,000 would be a pretty good number. And so there were bands like Jethro Tull, Deep Purple, and so on, who were putting out music DVDs and doing respectable, profitable figures. But these days, if you sold 100,000 back in, the year 2000 or 98 or whenever it might be, versus today, you might sell 10 or 15,000 if you were lucky. It's really, really a very small market, and that's very understandable, because really you buy a DVD, you're just going to watch it once, maybe twice. Whereas you listen to the music, 10 times, 20 times, and or even more. So it doesn't have that repeat entertainment value that pure music alone does. So it is limited value. It is just a way of getting something across to people. The delivery of that, if you're going to do it in 5.1 surround and it's shot in high definition, of course, it ain't going to make it on YouTube. It will find its way onto YouTube, and as fast as you can take it down for copyright reasons, it'll pop up again, but it will be pretty awful.
Right.
Because it is simply going to be, at best, a crude, very limited bandwidth stereo and nowhere near the visual definition that you would get from a Blu-ray DVD.
Understood. Yeah. So now that you've done all this sort of research and sort of embraced Jethro Tull as a human and as a character, I guess, if there is an afterlife, what would you now say to him? Like, should you meet him in this afterlife?
Well, I'm not sure that I believe in that kind of an afterlife, so it's a very hypothetical
right.
question.
Of course.
I suppose, if we suspend disbelief,
right.
Not that I'm an atheist, but I just don't believe in that kind of a simple, family and old friends, just as you remember them.
Right.
I think I'd be more interested in what I would have to say to Adolf Hitler
right.
than to Jethro Tull, or what I would say to Jesus Christ, the historical character,
right.
rather than Jethro Tull. But chances are, that's just not going to happen in
right.
the afterlife.
Fair enough.
If there is such an experience awaiting us. But
right.
Just to answer your question, I suppose my word would be sorry, because it is sort of embarrassing, and I would also have to go up to J.S. Bach and say sorry.
Oh no, not at all.
And one or two other people too. Mozart, I would have to say sorry, because I have done things with their music which perhaps they might really disapprove of. I can tell myself that because they were improvising guys, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, great improvisers. If they'd been born in the 30s, they probably would have become jazz musicians.
Right.
If they'd been born in the 40s or 50s, they might have become rock musicians. But they weren't. They were born at a time when music and what music was about was largely informed by its traditions in the church liturgy and to some very little extent by, I suppose, some elements of what we would call folk music, traditional music.
Right.
But nonetheless, I think being improvising guys, they might just about be prepared to let it go, that I would take one of their tunes, take the essence of the melody and the harmonic essence and sort of twist it around, do something with it, in terms of realizing it in a different way. My optimism regarding that view is based on the fact that if somebody covers one of my songs, which doesn't happen that often, but obviously has a few times over the years, I'm much more interested when they do something radically different with the song.
Right.
If all they do is just sing it kind of like I did it and the music is pretty much the same, then, I don't have a problem with it, but it just doesn't really catch my attention. But if somebody really turns it around, does something stylistically very different, then I'm all ears, because I'm interested in hearing it done the way I would not do it.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to like it, but I am going to be more interested and possibly entertained by it if it's radically different and turns my approach on its head.
So perhaps they would share that view, right?
Well, that's my optimistic hope.
There you go.
That they would feel the same about my having played some of their music as I feel about people having played some of mine.
There you go. So just sort of one final kind of humorous type question. So, after decades of touring, do you have any sort of favorite Spinal Tap like memories?
Well, I've lots of Spinal Tap like memories because Spinal Tap, of course, was written and with a number of advisors who were pretty close to the real world of rock music, and as people who followed the music that was, I suppose, of their era. It was quite easy for them to spoof it and to take some elements, some anecdotal stuff from sources which I think one of which I do know about. So of course, there are elements in Spinal Tap which are based upon real rock bands and what they did. I mean, it's hard.
Right.
Of course, the obvious one is the Stonehenge one. You know, that was based on I think a Black Sabbath moment. There was some Deep Purple moments in there. There was the thing with the Pods. I'm pretty sure that was derived from Jethro Tull when we went on to opened a show wearing giant white rabbit suits and couldn't get out of them, which was
right.
You know, that was that. I mean, Derek Small, the bass player, smokes a Peterson pipe in Spinal Tap. I mean, where could he have got that from, except for 3 members of Jethro Tull who smoke Peterson pipes? Even Derek Small's name, as I pointed out to Harry Shearer once, appears both on the Thick as a Brick album and the Passion Play album, and yet becomes mysteriously, very few years later, the name of a character in Spinal Tap. Derek Small, I mean, it's not a name you must have heard it somewhere, and it's in the back of your mind. It came back. Harry said, "Oh, it's just coincidence."
Oh, really? He didn't.
I
he
said,
didn't know.
because I showed him a copy of Thick as a Brick with the name Derek Small on it, and he said, "Oh, it's just coincidence." So I said, "Well, Harry, I have to ask you: do you actually have, or have you had, a copy of the Thick as a Brick album in your record collection at home?" And he replied in Bill Clinton-esque terms. He said, "Yes, but I didn't listen to it."
That's awesome. That's
anyway,
fantastic.
so yes, I think there's an element of reality in the Spinal Tap thing, which of course is just, I think what everybody goes through is these wonderful anecdotal moments of one sort or another, and many of which are just plain funny. Some are quite unpleasant, you know, like having a beer mug of piss poured over me just as I was walking on stage at Shea Stadium in 1972, or being hit in the chest and in the middle of a show and looking down and seeing blood coming out of what I thought was a gunshot wound, and adrenaline had kicked in and the pain had yet to get me, until I realized that amongst the blood there was a little piece of string hanging out of my shirt, and I pulled it, and out came a freshly used tampon.
Oh my goodness.
So we experience these little moments. Some of them, as I say, are a little unpleasant, and some of them are just plain funny, like they are in Spinal Tap.
Right.
We all have those kind of tales, and I think that's what we do. We get together again, with past band members. I mean, that's probably all we do. Like a bunch of old guys sitting on the porch with a beer, talking about old times.
Right.
It's a bit sad, really.
Actually, that brings me to, I think in a month or two, I'm going to do an interview with Martin.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any any of those anecdotes that I should maybe sort of ask him about specifically?
There's loads of funny moments that I can tell you about Martin, but I never would, because
No.
It's always a bit, if you do something that's making fun of somebody else, I think it's got to be something you well understand is okay.
Right,
and
right.
I don't think I would choose to do that about most band members directly, because there are lots of funny moments, some of them embarrassing, some of them quite scurrilous, and some of them really shouldn't be repeated.
Right.
Even in adult male company. But I'm not that kind of a guy. I
Gotcha.
just, what I would say to people in the privacy of the hotel bar, and I think we all know the stuff that we don't repeat and
Of course.
take away. But I would never talk publicly about any band members, and especially Martin, because obviously our relationship goes back,
of course,
to 1969, and so I'm certainly not going to poke fun at him, but I'm sure we have shared many funny moments together, but they probably would involve talking about somebody else, a third party that neither of us should embarrass. But, of course, there's lots of funny things happened along the way, and
so I will leave it to him to disclose or not
if he
disclose.
comes up with some anecdotes, but I think you'll find he'd probably take the same tack as me, that
there you go.
he would think it was inappropriate, really, to talk about stuff where it it's kind of revealing the
Right.
intimacies of life on the road or personal relationships. I think he's very, very like me in that regard. He doesn't tend to. He knows where to draw the line. I have met people, and indeed been people in the band, perhaps, who are unfortunately perhaps not of that degree of restraint. Who will dish the dirt or
Right.
talk behind your back or say things that are sometimes either plain untrue or designed to embarrass you. But
Right.
again, it's just maybe one or two people out of 26 members of the band that might be inclined to sometimes say things that they shouldn't.
Right. Understood. Yeah, I was looking for like ask him about Cleveland or something, very concise like that. But I'll see what he comes up with. Well, Ian, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today, and thank you obviously for the decades and decades of work. I actually became a Tull fan during the Under Wraps period, so it's funny that you mentioned about the rabbit suits, because I remember that tour you guys appeared on stage under white paper, if I remember correctly.
Well,
right?
that was another brave moment of starting off a show when you kind of put yourself on the line where a lot of things can go wrong.
Right.
However, on the Under Wraps tour, I don't think actually anything went wrong technically or production-wise. I mean, the nearest, well, not that it was going wrong, and this is probably the anecdote you want to hear, was that unknown to all the band members, as we hid in our wrapped-up state on the beginning of the show, there was one big paper wrapping that was always the last one to be revealed, to have somebody burst out of the paper wrapping, and that was halfway through the first verse of the first song, after the band had already broken out of their wrapping paper and started to play. And then the final burst out came usually in the form of a naked lady who would burst out in strobe lights and with a lot of misdirection, so half the audience would kind of see the naked lady, because she was completely stark. It was a different person every night. And half the audience would just not really spot it, and someone said, "Guy, you see the naked woman?" And someone said, "No, what naked woman?" So it was very carefully designed so that maybe only half the people really just saw it in that split second of strobes.
Right.
And I think it was probably towards the end of an American tour that all members of the band were apart from me, because I think I was actually downstage as this happened, so I didn't see it happen. The rest of the band did all see that when the naked lady burst out of the paper wrapping, there were in fact two naked ladies who had been very closely entwined under the paper wrapping to make it look like there was only one person there. So that slightly erotic thrill certainly caught the attention of band and crew members, but sadly to say, I was facing the audience and they were upstage of me, so it is a mere piece of anecdotal stuff to which I can, like you, only try to use my imagination.
Understood. Well, I appreciate. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So.
Yeah, well, Martin will probably remember that, because he probably had a very good view of a couple of
there you go.
Kurt Bottoms being rushing off the stage.
There you go. Well, yeah, again, just thank you so much for the music, and best of luck on the tour. Jethro Tull, obviously, is the website.
Yeah, jethrotull.com, everything is on there, and it just remains to take its final shape as a new tour. So we start rehearsals, as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, and we have the final elements of technical pre-production to do before we tape to the first stage on a short UK tour in September.
Right.
By the time we get to the US, it should be well settled in as a performance. So
right.
It's a good time to be coming to see it when it's a few weeks old and everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing.
Excellent. Looking forward to it very much.
Terrific. Good to talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Bye.
Bye.
Sitting on the park bench, eyeing little girls with bad intents. Aqualung, my friend, don't just start away uneasy. You poor old sod, you see it's only me. Do you still remember December's foggy freeze, when the ice that clings onto your beard was screaming agony? Hey, and you snatch your rattling last breaths with deep sea diver sounds, and the flowers bloom like madness in the spring. Sun streaking cold, an old man wandering lonely, taking time the only way he knows. Leg hurting bad as he bends to pick a docket. He goes down to the bog and warms his feet. Feeling alone, the armies of the road, Salvation Alamo, a cup of tea. Aqualung, my friend, don't you start away uneasy. You poor old sod, you see it's so good me. Aqualung, my friend, don't just start away uneasy. You poor old sod, you see it's only me. Sitting on the park bench, eyeing little girls with bad intent. Starts running down his nose, greasy fingers smearing shabby clothes. Hey, Aqualung, drying in the cold sun, watching as the pretty panties run. Hey, Aqualung, feeling like a dead duck, spitting out pieces of his broken luck. Hey, Aqualung.
So there you have it, my conversation with Mr. Ian Anderson. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again to you for listening, and to Ian for taking the time to chat with me. If you do get a chance, certainly do check him out. I think the dates are listed on his website, jethrotull.com, and more to be added as he indicated. If you want more of Pods and Sods, you can catch us on Facebook at facebook.com/Pods Sods. We're also on iTunes. We're on Stitcher. What else? We have a blog, which is podsodcast.blogspot.com. You can check us out there. Tons of episodes, lots of variety there. Yeah, once again, thanks for listening. And I like to close out this show, instead of every show, with some words of wisdom that don't have any specific meaning to this episode, but ones that I happen to believe are strong, and it's just a message that I like to send out into the cosmos whenever I can. So I will leave you with some words from Mr. Bill Hicks. Thank you.
The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us, and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok? But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love. The eyes of fear want you to put bigger locks on your door, buy guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love instead see all of us as one. Here's what we can do to change the world right now to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would many times over, not one human being excluded, and we can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace.